Cognition and long-term memory. A concept is a mental grouping of similar objects, events, ideas, or people. A prototype is a mental image or best example of a category formed on the basis of frequently experienced features. So like if you know birds have two legs, a beak and feathers, you're going to look for those things when when you're looking for a bird. So a prototype is similar to kind of like a stereotype. So it's pretty much how you think things fit. So there are a couple different types of concepts. We have natural concepts. These are imprecise mental classifications that develop out of our everyday experiences. Most of the concepts in our everyday life are natural concepts. Artificial concepts are concepts defined by a set of rules or characteristics, such as a dictionary definition or mathematical equations. So most of the concepts learned in school are artificial concepts. So it's almost kind of like street smarts versus book smarts, with natural concepts being street smarts and artificial concepts being book smart. We have tools to help us figure out the episode, the context, and stimulus of a situation. Schema, that vocab word that we've talked about a few times this year, so hopefully you guys remember what it is. Remember, it's a general framework that provides expectations about topics, events, objects, people, and situations. So it's our framework. We look at our schema, pretty much our background knowledge, and that's how we interpret things we see. So, if like in the one scenario where you're reading about a wrestler, but you don't know anything about wrestling, you might think it's talking about a jailbreak because they're using certain terminology. If you also remember when we talked about like schema, we talked about assimilation and accommodation. So remember, assimilation is where you take in, uh, you use your schema to take in new information and compare it to that. So like if you see something in flying and you're a toddler, well you know birds fly, so you think everything that flies is a bird, right? So you assimilate it into your schema. Well, once you realize there's more than one thing that flies, it could be a moth, it could be a plane, right? Now you've accommodated your schema to realize there's more things than just birds that fly. A script. A script is schemas about sequences of events and actions expected to occur in particular settings. So, we expect certain things to play out in certain settings based off our schemas, right? Our previous knowledge. Like sometimes, maybe if you go to a certain party, you expect certain things to happen at that party, right? That would be the script. Long-term memory. As far as anyone knows, there is no limit to the duration or capacity of long-term memory. Memory, short-term memory has limitations, right? It lasts for about 20 seconds and it has about 7 pieces of information plus or minus 2. Long-term memory is essentially limitless, right? As long as you're alive, you can have long-term memories. You can remember things from 100 years ago. Long-term memory is essentially all of your knowledge of yourself and the world around you. Unless an injury or illness occurs, this memory is limitless. So everything you know is your long-term memory. I mean, you still have like grandparents that tell stories about when they were 5 years old, walking 3 miles in a blizzard to get to school, right? They love telling the stories from, even if they're, like I said, 90, 100 years old, they can still tell those stories. Now, they might have forgot some things throughout time, but they still have that memory. So you see a little flow chart here. You're going to see a couple of these, and I'll try to make a copy of another flow chart I have to give to you guys. But it's just so how long-term memory works. So you have on the left-hand side, you have declarative memory. This is also called explicit memory. So this is broken up in episodic memory and semantic memory. If you remember semantics, that means meaning. Procedural memory, this is implicit memory. This is broken up into skills and habits that we have. So here's another flowchart. So you got the declarative over here. That's explicit memory. That's knowing what, right? So that's kind of like facts and things like that. Think about school. So this and then explicit memory can be broken up into semantic memory, Remember, semantic means meaning, so we're talking about language, facts, just general knowledge would be in there. And then it's also broken up into episodic memory. That's events, that's personal experiences. So anything like your 8th birthday party, right? That would be an episodic memory. So think about like an episode, right? You got episodes of shows, events in your life. That would be episodic memory. On the other side, you have procedural memory, otherwise known as implicit memory. This is knowing how to do things, right? So this is, think about like muscle memory type of thing. So these are like motor skills you have. This is like opera conditioning, classical conditioning, if you remember from the learning unit we talked about. These are things you do without, you know, thinking about it. These are your procedural memories. So types of memory. So when dealing with a long-term memory retrieval, there are two types, right? So you have the implicit memory that we just talked about, which is a memory that was not deliberately learned, no conscious awareness, right? It just happens naturally. So like muscle memory, like think about sports, throwing a ball, shooting a basket, kicking a ball, whatever it might be. This is also known as non-declarative memory. Where explicit memory is a memory that had been processed with attention and can be consciously recalled. Right? So example of this would be the 3 stages of memory we just learned about. Right? You had to think about that. You had to study it. This is also known as declarative memory. So this one happens in the hippocampus, where implicit memory, if you remember when we did the brain unit, like procedural memories, that was done in the cerebellum. General rule to remember the difference between the two, right? A memory is implicit if it can affect behavior or mental processes without becoming fully conscious. Explicit memories always involve consciousness, right? You're always aware of what you're doing with explicit memory. Studies implicit versus explicit, right? People with amnesia who read a story once will read it faster a second time, showing implicit memory. So when you have amnesia, like you don't remember things, right? You forgot your memories. But, that shows implicit memory because you do it without even realizing it. So you read it faster a second time because even though you don't remember the story, subconsciously you read it faster because you know what's happening, right? So one part of your brain is able to process it even though explicitly you can't remember it. So going into a little bit more detail with declarative memory, right? So we have the episodic memory. This is the portion of memory that stores personal events or episodes. This is the storage of things like time and place. Semantic memory, this portion of memory stores knowledge or general knowledge, facts, and language and meaning. So this is specifically where all of the information you know is stored, right? So all the facts, about school, think about like trivia, that type of thing is all stored there. Engram, this the engram is the biological basis for long-term memory. It's also known as the memory trace. So if you remember, we talked about this, right? It's that semi-permanent memory trace across the synapse. So the more you go over something or the stronger the memory is, the stronger that memory trace becomes. So parts of the brain used in memory. So we've talked about this a little bit. There's two parts of the brain psychologists know for sure are involved in memory are the hippocampus and amygdala. All right, so we talked about this. Uh, in a process called consolidation, the information in the working memory was gradually changed over to long-term memory. All right, so that happens in the hippocampus. The amygdala seems to play a role in strengthening memories that have strong emotional connections. So we know the amygdala is your emotional center, and we know a lot of memories are tied to emotion. So we know the amygdala plays a part in that. And so obviously, we know other parts of the brain. We have ideas deal with other memories, but these two we're pretty confident about. So we talked about amnesia as forgetting things, but there's two different types of amnesia. You have retrograde amnesia. That's the inability to remember information previously stored in memory. So think about retro as old stuff. So you can't remember any old stuff, right? Antegrade amnesia is the inability to form memories from new material. So as memories form, neurotransmitters collect at the synapse before absolute threshold is crossed. These are called memory traces, what we just talked about. A sharp blow to the head or electric shock can prevent these traces from consolidating, making it hard to recall that information, right? So you can lose your short-term memory. So think about like retrograde amnesia. That's the inability to remember information previously stored. So there's lots of movies about both. I think so. Obviously, you got Nemo, right? Dory has her memory issues, where she can never remember what's going on. She seems to have short-term memory loss. Memento, I haven't seen, but it's similar. Like he actually, I think, tattoos stuff all over his body so he can remember what's happened in the past. Kind of like a Jason Bourne, also with the Bourne Identity. Also, The Vow, right? So that's based off a true story. Takes place in Chicago, where she gets in a car accident and she doesn't remember like the last 5 years of her life. Or like 51st Dates. Now that is antegrade amnesia. So that's the inability to form new memories. So I'd imagine, they don't talk about it in the movie, but she probably had damage to her hippocampus. So she wakes up every day thinking it's the same day, right? Like it's her birthday, so her dad and her brother play along with it. Buy like 1,000 copies of the same newspaper. Cut a cake every day because it's her birthday. So eventually Adam Sandler. So that's what Drew Barrymore, and so then Adam Sandler and her, they fall in love, but she doesn't remember. Imagine waking up to someone and not knowing who they are because she can't form any new memories. So eventually, not to spoil it for you, but it's an old movie, so if you haven't seen it yet, they pretty much make a videotape. So then she wakes up and she can watch it for all the memories to kind of come back. Not saying that's accurate, but that's what happens in the movie. So imagine waking up like she was pregnant, with some stranger lying next to her until she watches the movie. So retrograde amnesia is, like we said, is a form of amnesia where someone will be unable to recall events that occur before the development of amnesia. Antegrade amnesia is a loss of ability to create memories after the events that cause the amnesia occur. So I like this, a lot of times if you want to visualize things, just look at this little, almost like a timeline thing here. So, obviously you have the time point of the brain injury. So if you can't remember new information, right, that's called antegrade amnesia. If you lost old memories, that's retrograde, right? So one for this, I always think about retro is old. So for retrograde amnesia, you can't remember the old memories. So recall and recognition. Memories can be cued in two ways. We have recall, which is a retrieval method in which one must produce previously presented material. So example of this would be like an essay test, or like the FRQs that we take, right? Free response questions. At least if you were in class, you'd have to recall all the information. You wouldn't be able to look it up. Or a police sketch of a suspect, right? So recall is where you have to find information somewhere in your brain. So if you're doing a police sketch of someone, you have to think about what do they look like and then tell the person. Where recognition is a retrieval method in which one must identify information that is provided which has previously been presented. So like a multiple choice test, right? You have all the answers in front of you. You just have to choose the right one. Or think of a police lineup, right? You have the people in front of you. You just have to pick which person did the crime, right? So recall, you have to think about, if you're writing an essay or something like that, you have to come up with the answers from, or a short answer, whatever it might be. You have to come up with the answers from your brain. Where recognition, the answers in front of you, you just have to recognize what is the right answer. All right, last one for long-term memory, part one, is relearning. So relearning is a measure of memory that assesses the amount of time saved when learning material for a second time. So whenever you have to learn something for the second time, it's easier, right? If you've already learned it once, now you just have to like trigger, like it's already there somewhere in your brain. You just have to trigger it. So a lot of times people go off to the college and they take psychology. A lot of people pass the AP test. So even people like in the honors psych class, they get to college and like, oh my God, this is so easy because all they have to do is relearn the material the second time. And a lot of times they remember the stuff from the previous year already. But it's easy once you've already learned something just to learn a second time. And, that's why as we in a typical year, we're constantly learning, going over old material in our tests. So, and that's especially now second semester, we're going to start, going over old material because relearning for the second time is going to be a lot easier, and that way everyone's prepared for the AP exam.